there a difference between manipulating sports for gambling purposes, as you just mentioned, as opposed to creating better storylines vis-a-vis ratings where the networks might try to manipulate a game so they've got a Game 7, for instance?
Well, there is a difference because if it's doing it in a gambling perspective, there's the law. There's the Sports Bribery Act, just passed in 1964. And that makes it illegal, basically, for myself, for example, if I were to pay a player to fix a game, that's against the law. But if a league, for example, told a referee, like in the case of Tim Donaghy, or at least what Donaghy claims, if a league told the referee, say, hey, don't call fouls on this guy, give these guys a little more leeway, call it tighter against that team, basically manipulate, fix the game the way the league wants it, that's not against the law. And that's a big difference. It's illegal on the gambling side. It's not illegal on the corporate business side of the league. So, I mean, there's two aspects to this, this subject matter, but the interesting thing is one's illegal and one's not. The leagues can fix their own games. They can manipulate them all they want because they're entertainment, and there's no law protecting that.
Like professional wrestling, for instance. I mean, basically you're saying that when the league does that, the NBA, Major League Baseball, the NHL, NFL, whatever, if they're doing that, it really puts down their sport to the level of WWE.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that the WWE, you can bet on that in Europe.
Are you kidding me?
No. So, I mean, when people say, well, you can't bet on WWE, it's, purely just, entertainment, it's an act, it's the show, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what, you can bet on it in other countries. You can't bet it here in the United States, but you can in other countries, so they don't seem to care. So if the same thing is happening in the NBA, if it's happening in the NFL, big deal. I mean, you don't know the results. 50% of the people, if the bookmakers are doing their job right, are going to be wrong anyway, betting the wrong side, so what's the big deal?
Are you saying that there are these backroom meetings where league officials come down and talk to the refs and say, hey, it would be really good if the New York Rangers met up with the LA Kings in a cup final? Wouldn't that be good for ratings? Can you guys make sure that you call that hooking penalty with 30 seconds left? Are you saying that happens?
Yeah, and basically I am. But I think the interesting thing is it doesn't have to be that overt. I think if referees have been around long enough, and again, Tim Donaghy in the NBA kind of spelled this out, is that the referees just kind of got the message. They understood without having to be told. And a lot of times it would be done in subtle ways. They would, because they have to review game films of themselves and review game films of other referees, and they get, directives from the league about, hey, look out for these sort of calls, that sort of call, make sure you call those, make sure maybe you let those go. It's done in a subtle way, but it's definitely being manipulated because like you've mentioned, we've seen it many times where you're watching any sport and you hear the commentator say, hey, they're really letting them play out there. Well, how is that possible? If you have a league rule book and you have these rules stipulated that if a player does this, that's a foul and this should happen, why isn't it being called? It's not that it's being missed. You can see referees sometimes looking directly at certain plays, and they're not calling it. So why? And that's the thing, that if they're not calling it here and then they're enforcing it there, why is this happening? And the interesting thing for me with the Coyotes is that they were, a terrible team when they were the Winnipeg Jets, when they were originally Coyotes. They never got in the playoffs. Then all of a sudden they have no ownership. And then suddenly they start making the playoffs over and over and over again in the past couple of years. And this year they're doing really good. They look like they're on the run to do something. The team gets bought, officially bought, so it's no longer in the NHL's control, and immediately they lose to the Kings and are out of the playoffs. I think they bolstered up the Coyotes to get an owner because the NHL didn't want to own them anymore, and once they did that, they just let them drop and go back to being the way they are.